Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I've got a guest with me, Tim Holt, who's got some great experience from consulting through into interim management, centered around areas like operational efficiency. And this is pretty topical given the period of, well, it's pretty topical, bearing in mind that we're probably going to a bit of a lull period or a bit of a down period with the UK economy, and a lot of clients are speaking about cost reduction at the moment. So I thought I'd get Tim on, and maybe Tim can explain a bit about his background and a bit about what he's done, and then give us some insight into operational efficiency and how we should start looking at delivering some of that now. But Tim, over to you. Why don't you introduce yourself a little bit?
Great, thanks, Mark. Yeah, thanks for having me on. So, in terms of my background, I've been doing interim consultancy for probably best part of 20 odd years now. And I come into businesses to support them on program delivery or consultation, depending on what the problem statement is of that business. And it can range from a sort of high level transformation activity down to more sort of operational change. But yeah, I tend to lead on bigger pieces of change and support either that sort of more strategic side at the beginning to help set up programs of work, but then quite often lead on delivering through to the end. Tends to be across bigger business, although I have worked with smaller SMEs and across all sorts of ranges of industry, to be honest. Sort of cut my teeth in retail, but I've worked in public, private sector, P-backed activity, finance, leisure, all sorts. So yeah, I've had quite a good breadth across various different operational change. And really enjoy sort of coming in to support a business overcome issues, whether it's in the IT space or across people challenges or primarily process change as well. And I actually prefer it when there's bigger change across all of those three areas. So yeah, really enjoy helping those businesses go from A to B.
No, great. Thank you. I think given a lot of the people that we work with have a similar-ish background to you in terms of they've got some consulting experience, so they know genuinely how to speak to a customer and how to extract out what those problems are. Great skills. And then into interim management, which I think is more about delivery, ownership of delivery, hands-on, holistic view, great. And then on top of that, we've got industry agnostic and working across any industry and across all functional areas at the same time. And I think that's why, yourself included, Tim, our interim managers are great at giving insight into things like this because they see it as a holistic picture and they see it as an independent. So I appreciate your time today. Tell me about the operational efficiency that you've been doing in the past. What's a common question a client will ask you? Will it be a case of, can you reduce costs? Or will it be, I've got a gut feeling that our target operator model is not working and these are the reasons why? What question do they normally sort of ask you?
Well, it depends on the client, obviously, and when. So I've probably been doing this for over 20 years. And originally I'd sort of come in as part of a team, work as a consultancy with a problem statement, and it usually be about process, process underlying everything. If I think about where I started out in retail, you can drive operational efficiencies incrementally because you're doing the same process over and over again. So looking at the operation and looking at incremental gains, you can actually make quite a big change to the operating model. But you mentioned operating model. Sometimes there's a full sort of operating model change needed, and I've worked with companies looking at the Tom and then implementing a new operating model. So it really depends on the company, how big it is, and what their problem statement is. I think currently there's definitely a view on cost optimization. So for me, that it depends on the business, but you'll look at process, people, and systems. I think there's a lot of change in IT at the moment. Lots of people rolling out ERP, CRMs, whether it's Salesforce or Dynamics. So I think there still will be change in that space. But I think we'll see a lot of process efficiency change as well, so to really minimise costs but maximise efficiency in those end-to-end processes. And fundamental to every business is capability. So you'll always need to ensure that you've got the right people doing the right thing at the right time. And I think that's one of the key areas, when you're looking at operating model and org design, is ensuring that you've got the right structure set up to lead you forward. And businesses are on different profiles, aren't they, depending on how old they are. So, some businesses do quite well in spite of themselves, but then obviously their people sit behind everything. And so I've been in a lot of change where we're literally looking at capability and how we can change and drive capability within the business.
Yeah, okay. And where's the first area that you look at in terms of operational efficiency?
Process it sits behind everything for me, so that's where I usually look at. Even if you're doing some IT upgrades or IT change, really you need to ensure that the processes are right. And so for me, nearly the first thing you ever do is just understand: does the business understand the processes? Are they fully mapped out? And if they're not, then there's a great opportunity to do that, because actually deliver a process piece is fundamental. But then sometimes they have those, and it's looking at those processes and understanding where those incremental changes can happen. So I've done a lot of lean management in my past, so you can really look at where the blockers are, where the waste is within those processes, and re-engineer them. Quite often capability within the business is really good, but they do the same thing over and over again and might not be able to see those incremental wins. So it's literally coming in and having a look at that and lifting the bonnet and seeing where those opportunities are for change, because small change can make a massive difference to optimize efficiency across the ways of working.
Yeah, I agree with that. We've seen that time and time again where, the client's made just very small changes, but the knock-on effect is quite dramatic. So if I've got a client who, let's say they realize that certain things aren't working. So customer complaints might be rising, sales might be falling slightly, their competitors might have a bit of a technical edge or something like that, then is the first thing they need to do is make sure they've detailed their processes before calling in someone like you? Or can you help with the whole sort of process mapping piece as well?
Oh no, I hope totally help with that piece as well. So I think quite often businesses won't know how best to process map. So there's obviously standard methodologies that can be brought in. So no, absolutely. I think coming in and reviewing the end-to-end processes is a classic way of starting with helping on a problem statement. It might be a mixture of that and IT change as well. Quite often a company will know that they need to implement a new CRM or ERP system, but actually if you don't understand the processes behind that, quite often the business processes is what will define the change anyway. So there's no point in just rolling out an IT system unless you really understand the fundamentals of what makes the business work and what those operating practices are. And like I said, the people side as well is massive. Quite often I'll work internally with teams, and the capabilities are great. You have internal teams that are really, really good, but they're good at what they do, and they quite often can't see where some of their challenges are. So you can support them. But I always think when you come into new business, if you use a mixture of internal and external, it makes a real good mix to drive efficiency, but also understand the problem statement within the business.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I've always been a big fan of using some internal resource as well as some external resource if the skill sets don't sit within the business. And let's be honest, a lot of companies are running quite lean nowadays, and they don't have these internal teams who act like an external team who can go in and problem solve. I remember the old sort of Williams sort of hit squad that they used to have, and all these big industries used to have like a hit squad team of people that are going and just sort things out like this. And I know that because we worked with a lot of them as they left big business, they came out into the interim market and started delivering as an interim manager. You know, they were great to work with. But I think never underestimate the power of your internal people if they've been pointed in the right direction, given the right toolkit with someone who will do the knowledge transfer piece with them as well and work with them like you do. In terms of sort of operational efficiency for cost reduction, if a client's got a mandate to reduce costs, and it might be quite an urgent mandate to reduce costs, do we just go straight to operational efficiency? Do we go straight to sort of process mapping, or is there other things you look at first?
Well, probably a strategic deep dive just to understand where the problem areas are. So I don't think you go straight to process mapping. You usually go in and do some interviews with the key parts of the operation with it you know that has the problem, because generally businesses understand where their issues are. You know. And that's why they're reaching out, so that they'll know what the problems are. So really doing those interviews and understanding from the people on the ground, and usually you start with the exec, but then drop into the specific area and interview those individuals to really find out where some of those other problem areas are. Because a business will know, but they might not know the underlying factors, and they might not know how to move it from where they are currently to, you know, a better way of working. So I think ultimately is asking those teams and really getting under the bonnet, really. But yeah, then you go into that process mapping as one of those areas. Now, some businesses already have really good processes defined, but you can also re-engineer those quite quickly with the right team and the right view of what needs to happen next.
Yeah, okay, thank you. It's nice to understand how you think about it and how you act upon it when you're working with a client. There'll be certain clients out there or certain people listening to this that don't quite understand the process of how that works. Maybe they've gone to a consultancy in the past and there's a team of people that's arrived, and you know now they feel like they've lost control of it a little bit, and that, you know, I've had clients tell me they feel that way. But it sounds like when you go in, you know, you're speaking to the exec, you're finding out what the problem statement is, and then you're speaking to the exec in terms of understanding where they think the problems are, and then cascading down the organization to then hear what their view of the problem is, and then pulling it together from a holistic perspective to look at then an action plan. Is that right? Have I sort of summarized that right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think one of the key areas of delivery is ensuring that the scope is absolutely agreed and nailed down. So, you know, and making sure that those conversations are had at the right level, but then moved into a delivery plan with a scope that is really defined and understood. Because so often you'll get into delivery and then things will come out of the woodwork and it'll be like, well, can we just do this? Can we just do that? Which is, sometimes you can be flexible and you need to be flexible, but actually you need to ensure that you don't keep moving the scope, because programs can kind of bleed, they can move on and move into other areas. You really need to define what it is you're working on. And if things come out in the wash as you're working through, then you can reevaluate. And so quite often businesses will start on a big program of works and they'll be worried about changing, because actually they'll think, well, we've invested. But, you know, I've been in programs where actually there's something that's come out of the woodwork that you just didn't know about. And so you have to be confident to stop and then to redirect and say, well, actually this is more important. And so it's having that two-way conversation, ensuring that you can challenge, but ensure that you've got eyes wide open as well. So I think defining the scope and really understanding what you're delivering and sticking to that is key. But also, you know, if things come out in the wash and things change, being able to be flexible and change quickly. I've dropped into businesses where programs have kind of stalled or not quite aren't quite on track or aren't working quite well. So come in and done some program recovery and understood, and actually they're probably on the right trajectory, but they just need a bit of revamp. They just need a look under the bonnet to say, well, you're not quite delivering in the right way. So focus on these priorities and reprioritize to ensure you're getting the most bang for your buck.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. And it sounds like that initial period of understanding the problem statement and then, I guess, validating the problem statement to some extent by speaking with the rest of it, that sounds very non-intrusive. That sounds like it's non-evasive. Do you find that? Do you find that people are quite willing to speak to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, communication is absolutely critical. So ensuring that you've got communication and buy-in from the right people in the business is absolutely critical. I'm lucky now that I tend to work at that sort of board level, C-suite level. So, you gain the trust of the exec, and as long as they're on the same page and everybody's in the same mind and knows where they need to go, you create the right communication channels, you create the right visibility of what it is you're delivering, and that you're feeding back in the right way. So, I'm always going on about governance, and as soon as I open my mouth and say the word governance, most people fall asleep. But ultimately, if you
Yeah.
get the governance right, it really works for you and works for the business, and making sure you've got those key levels of communication top to bottom, and that you can come in and communicate is absolutely critical. So working closely with those teams is really absolutely critical. And I mentioned before around using the internal teams to work with, because
Yeah.
ultimately the changes that are put in play will affect the business. So you need to take those teams on that journey, and they need to be part of the change. So that for me is really critical as well, to ensure you're embedding the change with the right teams going forward.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm a massive fan of using internal people where we can. And I know that kind of goes against the, I guess to some extent the consultancy model, or maybe the interim management model to some extent. And maybe there is a bit of conflict with that in terms of, the consultancy still needs to make money and all those things. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but what I would say is that when you speak to people who are independent interim managers, they normally say the same thing, which is you need a mix. It can't be just external. There is some capability in that business and we'll help you find it. That probably leads me sort of quite nicely on in terms of methodology and toolkits. From what you spoke about sort of just now, it sounds like you have a methodology to go through, which then makes sure you get the right outcomes. But do you also bring a toolkit with you? When you're meeting with these people and talking about where you think the issues might be and getting their take on it, do you have sort of set tools, or do you fill out set paperwork, or do you have a set way of compiling that together?
So there's lots of different toolkits and methodologies, and it depends on the problem statement. It depends on the company. It depends who you're working with. So for me, I will draw across lots of different methodologies and toolkits. So I don't have a standard set. I tend to be quite flexible because the culture of the business you're going into, you need to ensure it's right for that business. So
Yeah.
quite often you'll go into a business and they'll already have certain methodologies that they'll use, and they'll already have certain toolkits. So, you'll ultimately check to see what works for them, and then you'll cherry pick and you'll build on top of that. So they're depending on whether it's working with the people or whether it's IT or whatever, you need to then be flexible. So for me, I don't come in with a hard, fast rule. I'm going to use this. It's more around, well, I've been doing this for so long, work with different consultancies, with different companies. There's lots of different things you can use. So you ultimately work out what's the best one you can use and ensure it's right for the business. So I tend to be quite flexible to ensure that you come in with the right mindset and be open. Obviously you draw on your experience and you draw on capabilities that that will work and that have worked before, but not everything is right for a business, if you know what I mean. So I think you need to be fairly flexible and open, and there's lots of good stuff out there. So in terms of sort of methodologies, using agile, waterfall, or a mixture in terms of delivery, depends on internal business and whether you're using prints or whether you're using sort of program methodology, PMP, it really depends. For me, you tend to want to be able to be flexible and kind of use what works for internally for the business, but then also help challenge and say, well, what about this? You might not have used this before, but actually I think this is going to really work for you because it's worked before in a similar client with a similar problem statement.
Yeah, that's a good comment. Clients always like to know what's possible. Yeah. And I think that's the art of being a good consultant and a good interim manager is relaying to the client what's possible, showing them and then doing it, which is all the clients say, do. Get them to come in and do it. We want them to do it.
Well, and I think, so one of the big areas of change management, so as a sort of transformational consultant or interim transformational person who comes into a new business, quite often people say, well, I actually want a change manager. And you think, well, change is part of what we do. It's what we transform a business because that's what we do. And quite often people say, well, what's your change credentials? So, well, that's what I do all day, every day. That's part of the delivery. Within change implementation, there's lots of different methodologies. And again, someone might ask you, well, which one do you use? Well, I've probably used 7 of the key change methodologies over my time, or you use part of one and part of another because they tend to be quite similar, and they can sort of support each other in depending on which part of the business you're in or what part of delivery you're in. So I'd always say be open and flexible and not worry too much, as long as whoever's coming in to support you understands that there is need for change and that they have a good knowledge and understanding. Then let them sort of guide you, but also be flexible.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think as an interim management provider, one of the big things that we have to look at is that person right for what the business is going through right now? So not just is that person right for the business, I think that's more of a permanent hire type mindset. But I have to think about, is that person right for the business right now and where they want to be in the immediate future? And it's understanding about that style, approach, methodologies, understanding of governance and risk and appetite for risk, and all those things combined. Strangely, you can't get any of that on a CV. What you can get on a CV is, I use these tools, right? That's fine, but how do you apply them? What's the methodology? Normally you get in that after a conversation, how well you know someone. So thanks for highlighting that. I think you've probably strengthened my case as an interim management provider. So going back to the original question that we were talking about, which is reducing cost through maximising operations. Just give me a quick summary of what we've spoke about in terms of if a client is thinking about reducing costs through maximising operation, what should they be thinking about right now?
So I suppose it depends on the business and whether they need to do some big change or whether it's more incremental. Now, for me, in maximising your operation, it comes back to that process and ensuring that people understand where those benefits are. So it's looking at whether it's in the finance, but well, again, there's lots of different areas of the business, but if you're looking at finance, if you're looking operationally within the day-to-day, so it's really lifting the bonnet and understanding where they can get the most bang for their buck. Operating model change is probably a really good space to look at, because depending on businesses, how long they've been around and how long they've worked in a certain area, things will have built up over time, and there'll be opportunity in terms of process tweaks and process re-engineering where operations are kind of built over time, and there'll be legacy processes built on other processes. So, looking at that to see where incremental change can impact into that operation. So for me, that's always critical, is really understanding where you can get most bang for your buck. And then looking at where your people work and where there are opportunities in terms of your operating model. I think cost is always a tricky one in terms of reducing headcount. You don't necessarily need to do that, but you can actually look at where your operation is working and understand where they can work smarter, work better. With AI at the moment, there's so much change in that space. It's going to be a massive game changer over the next few years, and things will become easier. And so actually your key capability can be doing things more efficiently and actually drive you revenue, because they're actually spending more time doing value add tasks rather than sort of more repetitive tasks that we can sort of roll out into more IT driven activity. So for me, it's looking at a mix of what IT opportunities are there. Are there legacy changes of systems that can be looked at, through to process operational efficiency, which then has a knock-on impact to your capability, and really ensuring that your staff are actually working as best they can. And it also drives retention in staff, where your colleagues are actually doing things that they really want to do, and what they should be here doing, and are more customer centric, obviously. So I think customers at the heart of all transformation. You really need to understand your customer. So I think there's probably a lot of work in that customer centric space which drives operational efficiency as well.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think, you look after the customers, and guess what? The revenue looks after itself a little bit. So, I'm a bit old school in that sort of thinking, but I still think that's valid. I still think that's valid thinking. The one takeaway I've got from this conversation is slightly unexpected, to be honest. And I think what I would say is that if we've got an organization that's thinking about, oh, we've got a few operational issues here, or customer complaints are a bit high, or sales numbers are a bit soft, I think if someone's a CEO, CFO, they're a board level investor, they've normally got a good gut. The gut's saying something's not quite right. I think my advice to them, and this is the takeaway, the advice to them would be, start detailing your processes now. Because at some stage you might have to make a change. And when you do make that change, the core processes are going to form a central part of enabling that change. Start detailing those now, because it's not going to be destructive to the business. It's good to do that anyway. It's a good, healthy thing for any business to do. And it might just highlight a few areas that you immediately go, actually, I think we should change that a little bit. So that's the takeaway that I've got from this. And I hope other people have got sort of takeaways from it as well. But in terms of your time, thank you very much for your time today, Tim. It's much appreciated. And anything you'd like to sort of say as you say goodbye?
No, well, thank you, Mark. It's been really interesting chatting to you. So always good to catch up. And yeah, just on that process piece, it's funny, every time I do a process implementation, there's always quick wins that come up straight away, and you'll be surprised at little quick wins that you can roll out and drive efficiency. But then also things that come out that you might not have thought about, and things that are just a bit strange. You just think, why do we do it this way? And it's because it's always been done that way, and nobody's really questioned it because nobody's really looked at it. So I think you're right to say it's really good to understand your processes, because you get the quick wins, but you get the big wins as well.
Yeah, brilliant. Tim, thank you very much for your time, sir. It's been a pleasure speaking to you.
And to you, Mark. You take care. Catch up soon.
Bye.